Welcome to Season 2 of the Erotic Realm podcast, where we explore the world of eroticism, one erotic realm at a time. I'm Em, a sexologist and kinkster. The mission of the Erotic Realm is to humanize desire in all of its forms, including darker desires. Each episode, we dive deep into the psychology of desire with a sexpert, everyday kinkster, or a kink expert. This is an independent podcast. To support it, please consider becoming a paid subscriber at psychologyofdesire.com, where you'll also find deep dives into desire and surveys that you can participate in. You can also sign up there to get the podcast delivered directly to your inbox when it's released. And now for today's episode. The following conversation explores masculinity, sexual mastery, and the tension between performance and presence. I'm joined by Kevin Anthony, certified sexologist, Tantra counsellor, and teacher of men's sexual mastery. We explore what it means to become sexually skilled in a world that often confuses performance with intimacy. We talk about ejaculation, stamina, and the pressure that many men feel to master sex, not from curiosity, but from fear of inadequacy. We also explore Tantra, Polyamory, and emotional intelligence, and move into a deeply human conversation about grief, loss, and how desire continues after love changes form. This is a conversation about mastery, not as control, but as awareness, responsibility, and the courage to be fully present. Enjoy. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Erotic Realm. Today we're exploring the erotic realm of Kevin Anthony. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you for having me on the show. I'm excited.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. So before we dive into sex and tantra and mastery, we just want to know a little bit about your everyday life. What do you get up to when you're not exploring these things?
When I'm not exploring these things or working in this realm, I do a lot of different things. I'm really into action sports. I've been mountain biking for 32 years, rock climbing, martial arts. I'm a multidisciplined martial artist. I'm a musician. I play guitar and drums. And so those are the things that usually keep me busy outside of the erotic realms.
Wow, such a full life. You mentioned that you didn't grow up in a sexually open or educated environment. When you look back, what wasn't said about sex that ended up shaping you the most?
What wasn't said about
Yeah.
sex? Man, it'd be way easier to answer that question if we talked about what was said, because there
Okay,
was
yeah.
very little to
Go for it.
anything said. The only thing I really remember is that in high school, they had a day, and I say a day,
Okay.
where at a certain age, I don't remember if it was freshman or sophomore year, they had a day where basically they were going to go through all of sex ed with you. And I mean, how much can you really do? The reality is pretty much what they taught us was, don't have sex and don't get pregnant because it will absolutely destroy your life, was pretty much the extent of what they were teaching. And obviously they had to alert the parents that they would be teaching this. And so how this relates to conversations, at least, in my upbringing around sex, is I remember coming home after school after that day and my mom just asking, how did it go? And I said, okay, yeah, it was fine, blah, blah, blah. And that was pretty much it. That was like the extent of the sexual education that I got from either parents or schooling institutions.
Wow. Okay. So how did you get from that place to where you are now? How did that journey begin, and how did you end up in sexuality as your job?
A very interesting journey. So, fortunately for me, I've always been one of those people that always asks the question, why,
Mm-hmm.
to pretty much everything. So why? Why is it this way? Why is it that way? Is this really true? Is this not true? And so even though I was given very little education around sexuality, like most people, I as I was growing up and starting to sexually mature, I was feeling sexual and I wanted to know about it and I wanted to know how to do it. So I was just, asking all the questions, and obviously I couldn't really ask people as far as, parents or teachers, but, I would just go out and try to find out whatever I could from wherever I could. Now I'm at an age now where when I was young, we didn't really have access to much information. There was no internet. If you wanted to find something, you'd have to go to the library, and there weren't really books on sexuality in the library you could access either. So a lot of it in the early days was just trial and error.
Mm-hmm.
With early girlfriends, like, hey, why don't we try this? And what would happen if we did this? Right. And just trying to figure things out. Or you hear something like somebody said they could do this, let's try it. And of course, as I got older, I had more access to information. I read a lot more books. Then, when I was even older than that, I was going to workshops and things like that, just because I always had a desire to want to be good at it. It was obviously something that I enjoyed as I was, experimenting and experiencing. And I wanted to learn all I could about it. And what's interesting about that is as the years progressed, especially, living where I still live, which is Southern California, there was a very rich community, a rich Tantra community, a rich polyamory community, a rich just sex positive community. And so for a period of time, pretty much every weekend, there was some sort of workshop or event or something around, sex positivity going on. And so I was going to all of those things, learning from everybody I could. And then people started to kind of notice and they started asking me to help them. So I never intended
Mm.
originally to actually work in this field, but people just started asking me. They would just approach me, hey, I heard you know how to blah, 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 can you help me? And some of the early ones, I had several close male friends, and actually some that weren't even that close, approach me and ask me if I could teach them how to last longer.
Mm-hmm.
I had a friend at one point. I was living in a house with two roommates, and one of the roommates had a friend over. And at the time, I had my girlfriend over, and we were having sex. She tended to be very loud,
Mm-hmm.
and we finished what we were doing, and I was out in the kitchen, and my friend's friend comes up to me and he says, "Can you teach me how to do what I just heard coming out of that bedroom?"
I love it. So open to learning and being able to come up to you and approach you that way. You must have a very open energy. Mm-hmm.
I guess so, because sort of the culmination of that story is at one point I am out in public in a very public place by the beach with lots of people around, and I was there with my girlfriend at the time, and there was this kind of weird guy watching us, and my protector, alarm is going off, and I'm
Mm.
just she's about to leave, so she's getting her stuff together, and I'm trying to help her hurry up, like, hurry up, get your stuff together before I have to deal with weirdo guy over here who's staring at us. So I get her together, she gets off on her way, and then he comes up to me and I go, oh boy, here we go. Crazy guy's gonna come up and ask me something crazy,
Mm-hmm.
and he literally asks me a question about how to like control his mind, and like is basically asking me for coaching advice. And at
Wow.
that point, I looked up at the sky and I'm like, okay, I get it. I'm supposed to teach this stuff.
So that was a complete random stranger, not in one of these spaces, just feeling that you had that knowledge somehow. That's incredible. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you live long enough and you're paying attention, you
Mm.
will experience things in life that you just can't explain. And that was one of them. I've had
Mm.
many others, but that was one of them. That was just such a weird, random event to happen that I was like, okay, somebody sent that guy here as a messenger.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like it. So, what is it that you offer in your work now? Are you focused on helping men because it was men always coming up to you?
Nowadays, I actually work with men, women, and couples.
Mm-hmm.
I started out originally working with men. When I got together with my wife, who's no longer with us, I was doing couples with her. She was working primarily with women. I was working with men. We were doing couples together. Uh, and then after she passed, you know, she had all this great, work that she was doing with women. And I took it all down from our website because I was like, I can't do what she does, And I thought I didn't really have any value to share with the women. So I took it all down and I just continued working primarily with men and then couples. And then I started working with some friends of mine who do dating work. And I ended up working with a lot of women, helping coach them through, the sexual aspects of dating. And they were just absolutely loving it so much, getting male insight, like into how men
Mm.
think and what they want and what they're looking for, that I suddenly just had this epiphany that like, yeah, I actually have a lot of value that I can provide to the women as well. And so a couple of years ago, I added that back in, and now I'm working with men, women, and couples. And really, what I do is I help them identify the patterns and behaviors that are sabotaging their relationships and sex life. Because it's really hard to see those patterns when you're in them, right? So I
Mm.
help them see the patterns, and then I help them correct them so that they can shift into what I like to call, and it's my tagline. You'll see it on my website. I tell people that I help them have the relationship of their dreams and the best sex of their life, and that really is my goal.
What a wonderful goal. Can you take us through the common reasons why men, women, and couples seek your help? Do they have different patterns that you find across the genders?
Yeah, there are some generalities for
Mm.
sure. A lot of the men that come to work with me, it's generally performance based. So they'll come in saying, well, I know I'm not lasting long enough. I know I'm not satisfying my partner as good as I could be. And, maybe she's not as interested in sex. And I think it's probably because, I'm not doing a very good job at it. So that's a lot of the men. It's not all of them, but it's probably the most common pattern. So I
Mm.
often with men will be working with them on things like, how do you last longer? But here's the interesting thing too. And I tell men this all the time, and this is true of anyone, whether you're coaching men, women, or couples together, or whatever. Your sex life and your sexual performance isn't separate from the rest of you,
Hmm.
right? It's not separate from the rest of your personality. It's not separate from the rest of your physical body. It's not separate from the rest of your life outside. And so, even though a man might come to me saying, hey, I want to learn to last longer, yes, we will work on that. Yes, we will get you to lasting longer. But we also end up all the time, always end up working on the deeper aspects of what it means to be in relationship.
Mm.
Because the reality is those are generally the things that are in the way, right? So we can't just focus on retraining your physical body, right? Because even if you last longer, if you're not meeting her needs in the bedroom, if you don't know how to create intimacy, if you don't know how to connect with her, right? If you don't know what it is she actually even wants in the bedroom, then all that performance isn't really going to do you a whole lot of good. So with the men, we end up working with a lot more than just the physical performance, even though that is typically the main reason they will seek me out. Now, women, on the other hand, women will often come because they've basically had a lot of failed relationships
Hmm.
and they're looking for the right guy and they can't figure out why every relationship crashes and burns and, ends up in disappointment. Why he never calls back or, all that kind of stuff. And so, with the women, we often end up really working a lot more on the relationship end of things. However, that's not always true. I do work with women on the sexual sides too. A lot of times when it comes to women and sexuality, it's working with removing shame. That's a really big
Mm.
one when the women come is, a lot of what's holding them back as far as, really being able to open up sexually and really allow themselves to receive their man. A lot of it has to do with shame. So we're often diving into childhood stuff, religious upbringing stuff. So we're working a lot on the shame and also just connecting them to their sexuality in general. Because of all that shame and other reasons too, because of lots of abuse. It's so sad, but I really
Mm.
do see a lot of abuse. And it's not necessarily all really, really bad traumatic abuse, but just, you know, early sexual experiences where young men, had no idea what they were doing and they just, you know, the women did things and said yes to things that they didn't want to, which caused them to shut down, So
Mm.
we work with removing a lot of that stuff so that they can really step into their sexuality and really be open to it. And that's really, I mean, that can be truly life changing for a lot of women when they've
Mhm.
really felt shut down because of that stuff. And then they finally open up to their full sexual power, which is intensely powerful.
Mhm.
It's quite the awakening. So that's a major thing that I work with women on. And then, of course, with couples, it's all the relational dynamics. How do you
Mm.
communicate? Like now, one of the things I love about working with couples, especially around sex stuff, is when I'm working with one or the other, I'm telling them, okay, here's what you can do because I don't have access to work with the other person, right? But when I'm
Mhm.
working with the couple, now I get to bring them together and I get to say, okay, now here's the things you need to be doing, and here's the things you need to be doing, and let's see how we bring those together. So um, it's really fun to be able to work with both at the same time. So we work on, obviously how to have better sex, how to connect deeper, lots of communication stuff, understanding needs, how to meet those needs. Sometimes that involves some compromise. So there's lots and lots of things we can work with when it comes to couples as well.
Mm. Wow. Okay. Such incredible work you're doing, and your passion really comes through so strongly. What has been your biggest learning about sexuality in general from all of your coaching experience?
Ooh, that's a good question. The biggest thing I've learned in general about sexuality.
Yeah, what comes to mind right now? Hmm.
I would have to say that, sex really is a sort of key integral part of who we are as physical humans. And I think that part sort of gets skipped over. And in other words, for whatever reason, you can talk about all the reasons why, uh, you know, institutions will suppress it or shame it or try to control your access to it. But for whatever those reasons are, without going into conspiracy theories or rabbit holes or anything like that, um, it is a fact that it has been suppressed. It's been sort of taken away from us, and I think that when you really dive into it and you really learn about it and you really take the time to explore it, you come to the inevitable conclusion that this is not only a totally natural, healthy part of who I am as a human. It's actually the center or the root of all of my power as a human as well. And of course, you can understand why that might be suppressed. And
Mm.
so I love to wake people up to that idea that you need to embrace this as an essential part of who you are and then realize how powerful it is and then use that power for good.
Mm. Such a powerful statement. Now, one of the traditions on the podcast is exploring a quote with you. And today's quote is from someone you know well, Mantak Chia, who is a Taoist that has written many books, including Taoist Secrets of Love and The Alchemy of Sexual Energy. One of his quotes goes like this: At heart, most men are as terrified of women's infinite sexual capacity as they are fascinated by it. The general effect on men is to make them feel sexually insecure and causes them to attempt to compensate with some other strength. Sexual insecurity may be the primary reason men have sought physical, political, financial, intellectual, and religious advantage over women. So, how does that quote sit with you? Do you think there is some truth to it? Are men terrified of women's sexual capacity at times? And do they attempt to compensate through other means?
I definitely agree with that quote, but I will say this, it is largely unconscious.
Mm.
Right. So, and this is something I've said many, many times before, and I talk about this a lot about this idea that women are infinitely more sexually powerful than we are as men. And people, often I'll say that, and then people will roll their eyes or they're, whatever. And I say, well, think about it. She can have as many orgasms as she wants. she can go as long as she wants. Her orgasms will build in energy and intensity. If she wants to make you ejaculate, she can do it almost anytime she wants, even if you're really trained, right? Like she is infinite. She can have sex with as many men as she wants for as long as she wants. You, on the other hand, as a man, you can't. No matter how good you are, you will eventually hit a limit to what you can do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that it really is true that they are more powerful. And I do think that a lot of, I was kind of alluding to this idea that institutions and men in general have sought to control sexuality. They've sought to control sexuality for both men and women, but
Mm.
as we all know, they've particularly sought to control it in women. And I think one of the reasons for that is because of this fear of how sexually powerful they are. Now, those people who've intentionally sought out to control it and restrict it, they understood it. But I would say the average guy doesn't really have an awareness around the fact that he's intimidated by her sexual power.
Mm.
He's not consciously thinking about it, but yet he's taking actions that try to restrict or control her sexuality out of that fear.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting to think about it being an unconscious thing for most people. Do you feel like it's becoming more conscious?
In the general population, I'd say probably no.
Mm.
But what is getting better in the general population is the idea that sex is normal and
Mm-hmm.
natural, and it's okay to talk about it, and it's okay to learn about it. That I think is getting better. And I think if we can continue that trend, some of these deeper level patterns will eventually come up to the surface and become more popular. But I don't think, at least from what I've seen in my work, that most men are really aware that they do have an underlying fear of female sexual power.
And what changes for a man who does make this realization and moves it from being unconscious to conscious? How does their life change?
Well, I mean, they no longer need to try to control it.
Mm.
That's a big part of it. Is like if you understand, not only that she is powerful, but that this is all part of nature's design, right? Uh, then you don't want to control it anymore. You don't need to control it. You just need to figure out how to work with it.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, from my point of view, I've always been in awe of it. I've observed it, I've witnessed it, I've been on the receiving end of it. I've always been in awe of the power
Mm.
that women contain, and so I think it's amazing, and I think we should all, as men, consider ourselves blessed when a woman allows us to, be part of that power. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
there's a sort of image that I use when I'm talking about this, and especially when I'm talking about uh, different aspects of lasting longer for men. And I say, when her sexual energy is really flowing, when it's really awake and it's really going, and you penetrate her, it's like putting your penis in an electrical socket, right? It's just you get
Mm.
blasted with this enormous power coming from her, and it really is true. And it's an amazing thing to be on the other end of, especially if the two of you are consciously co-creating lovemaking, and you get to be the receiver of this, intense energy. It's amazing.
Mm. Mm-hmm. I love that metaphor. You've also described how discovering Mantak Chia's work opened a new erotic landscape for you. What was it that opened?
The biggest thing that opened was the idea that you could separate orgasm from ejaculation. And I
Mm.
believe it was one of Mantak Chia's books. I think it was his book titled Sexual Reflexology, that a girlfriend of mine actually gave me many, many years ago. And I remember reading that book, and she bought it because she was like, "Hey, this would be a fun thing for us to read, and maybe we could try some stuff in it." And I was like, "Cool, yeah, that sounds great to me." Um, and then there's stuff in there for men, and there's stuff in there for women. And when I was reading the stuff on men, and he was talking about that, I was like, "Really? That's possible? Oh, I got to figure that out." That was
Mm-hmm.
probably the biggest thing. And you know, when I say the biggest thing, some people listening who've never experienced this before would go, "Okay, well that's kind of cool, parlor trick. Like, how is that such a big, aha moment?" And the reason it's such a big aha moment is because once you learn how to do that and you can really separate your orgasm from your ejaculation, now you are in control of your body. Now you can make love for as long as you want. And when you can do that, now you can go into those ecstatic realms of just bliss that you've never experienced before, that the average man who only lasts 5 to 7 minutes, which is what all the studies have shown, there have been multiple studies that have shown this, 5 to 7 minute penetration sex is never going to get you to those places. But once you can control, your ejaculation, and you can separate orgasm from ejaculation, then you can really hit those places. And that's why it's such a huge aha, because it takes your sex from 5 minutes, 7 minutes, maybe 10 minutes at best of a little bit of this feels good, and then, oh, that was a nice ejaculation, to, oh my God, my mind is blown, I'm in an altered state of consciousness and I can't even walk across the room to go pee.
Mm. Love it. Okay, I wanted to bring in a piece of research here, because what we've been touching on isn't just philosophical, it's also psychological. So there's a foundational body of work by psychologist O'Neill on what's called gender role conflict. And his work was over 25 years of research and reviewing 232 empirical studies. And he found that many men experience chronic stress when they feel like they're failing to meet traditional masculine expectations, especially around success, emotional control, and, as we've been speaking about, sexual performance. So one of the key findings is that rigid masculinity norms don't just shape behavior, but they create anxiety, intimacy difficulties, and the sexual dysfunction. Do you think many men are trying to master sex because they're afraid of failing at masculinity, not because they're actually curious about intimacy?
That's a good question, because if we're talking in generalities, in men as a whole,
Mm,
unfortunately, I don't see the majority of men even attempting to master sex.
okay.
So, like, for instance, all the men that come to work with me obviously are. That's why they're coming to work with me, because these are men who've identified that, hey, I would like to be better at this, and I'm probably not really meeting her needs, right? But, for the overwhelming majority of men, I think they think that, 5 to 7 minutes is perfectly normal. And
Hmm.
probably the ones that are going 7 minutes think they're Superman.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. I don't see that we've kind of hit that tipping point yet where the majority of men are really trying to master their sexuality. What they're trying to master is how to get more sex.
Mm,
That's where they're really putting a lot of attention. How do I get more sex? The problem is they haven't figured out yet that the way they get more sex is to actually do two things. One, care about the person you're having sex with. So, work on the relationship.
mm-hmm.
And number two, learn how to have better sex. Right.
Yep.
But because they haven't quite made that connection yet, they spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to get women into bed, and a lot less time trying to figure out what to do once they're there.
Mm. And do you think that just comes back to education, and that many men are educating themselves through porn and not actually experiencing the education around relationships and everything that comes with sexuality?
Yeah, lack of education is a big part.
Mm.
It's probably the biggest part. I mean, if we really think about it, eh, you get into a lot of these situations where it's like you don't know what you don't know. So it's one thing to say, I don't know how to do something, but I'm aware that I don't know how to do something. And it's another thing to not even be aware that you don't know how to do something. And if I were to generalize, I would say that a lot of men aren't even aware that they don't know how to be good at sex. Some
Mm.
are, and that's why they're seeking, to be better at it. But I think many of them actually aren't necessarily even aware of what they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Because I can't really imagine any man that's in his relationship where his woman is not feeling sexual or not wanting sex, or she always has a headache or whatever, uh, realizing that he's not doing a good job and then not doing something about I mean, I'm sure there are a few here and there, but the point is like, as men, we, most of us, especially, the good men, there's always, bad people out there, but the good men and the ones that are in relationships who actually do care, you know, they'll say all the time, well, she never wants sex, or she always has a headache, or she just wants to get it over with. And they don't make the connection that, the reason why that is for her most likely is because she's not getting the kind of sex she wants. She's not
Mm.
satisfied with it. The same research that shows that men last 5 to 7 minutes shows it takes her 20 to 30 minutes to orgasm.
Mm-hmm.
So she's barely even warmed up. And if we want to talk about Taoist, and Montauk Chi and the way they view females versus males, they say that, women are like slow to heat up, right? And then slow to come to a boil, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is why we talk about all the time. You got to spend more time doing foreplay. And the foreplay isn't just, touching her genitals when you get into the bedroom. It starts before you even get into the bedroom. You've got to get her warmed up and going. So in 5 to 7 minutes, especially if you didn't take the time outside of the bedroom to be warming her up, she's not even lukewarm yet at this point.
Mm.
And then you're done, and then she's like, why do I even bother, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you because of that difference, I don't know any man that would look at that and go, oh, right, I get I'm not doing it right, but I'm not going to even try. So that's why I say I think a lot of them aren't really aware of it. Like, they don't understand why. And I hear it from them. They say, I don't know. I don't understand why she doesn't want to have sex. I don't understand why, she never wants to do this position or that thing, or why she's not really into it.
Mm-hmm.
And I go, well, okay, let me tell you why.
Mm. You've spent years in poly and tantra communities. What was that experience like, and what was your biggest learning from this time?
Ooh, here those communities have a lot of overlap, but I want to talk about them separately a
Mm-hmm.
little bit. Uh, so the Tantra aspect, or the Tantra community, one of the things that I really took away from that early on in my early exposure to that was that they really saw sex as something sacred. Whereas, maybe in the default world, especially 20 years ago, they saw it more as just a physical act. It's a bit more animalistic. But Tantra really sees sexuality as this, sacred experience between a man and a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And it really changes the game when you start to look at it from that point of view, when it's no longer about chasing the orgasm, and just being purely physical and having 5 minutes of intense sex and then passing out and going to sleep, or having a cigarette. Like, when it's no longer about that, and it suddenly becomes about, this whole experience, that's another thing that really shifts how great sex can be. So that was one of the early things that I really got from that. Now, unfortunately, here in the West, when we talk about Tantra, most of what you're experiencing here is basically what we would call Neo Tantra. And by that, here in the West, like, and if you ask somebody what is Tantra, even if they know nothing about it, what they're going to say is, oh, that's that weird kinky sex stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because in the West here, we associate Tantra with sex.
Yep. The
And
Kama Sutra.
right. That would be like the only thing they know. Yeah, it's all those funky sex positions in the Kama Sutra, right? But Tantra really is, it's a whole system for living life that encompasses your spirituality and your physicality and all of it together. So sex in Tantra is just like one sutra of a whole bunch of them. So unfortunately, a lot of times when people are experiencing Tantra here in the West, they're getting more of the Neo-Tantra sexual piece of it. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's valid. But if you really want to pursue Tantra itself as a whole, there's so much more to it than that. And so I had to actually really go and explore those other aspects of Tantra on my own, but at least being around Tantra communities kind of opened me up to what the possibilities are. Because once I started experiencing what real tantric sex could be, then I was like, ooh, I want to know more about that. Let me read this book. And I'm like, oh, there's even more to it. There's like this whole other aspect to Tantra. So it was kind of a gateway for me into the deeper realms of Tantra, which was, I thought, a really good thing. And then polyamory, that's another interesting one as well. I remember my very first poly experience. Do we have time for a little story?
Please.
Okay. So it was my birthday, and a friend of ours, this is my girlfriend at the time and myself, used to throw these sort of erotic parties, and they were different all the time, and they had different themes sometimes and stuff like that. And so he was having one, and we used to enjoy going to them. At the time, we had not experienced anything poly at all. But we liked to go and play in the sensual realms. And so, unbeknownst to me, she went to him and said, hey, it's his birthday today. Can we do something special for it? I had no idea. And so at some point in the middle of the party, he puts a chair in the middle of the room. And most people are not wearing much. I'm only wearing underwear at this point anyway. And he says, okay, everybody, it's Kevin's birthday, and I would like all the ladies here to give him an erotic dance. And I would suggest that by the time this dance is over, that he's not wearing anything.
Oh.
And I was like, oh my God, this is the best birthday I've ever had. So I'm about to sit, it's like a bar stool. I'm about to sit on this chair, and the ladies grab the chair, they throw it in the other room. They immediately rip my boxers off and give me the sexiest dance ever. And at one point, I'm just standing there. I've got my arms out to the side and my eyes closed because I'm like, I don't even need to watch. I just want to like feel, And at some point, I feel somebody's giving me a blowjob, and I thought, wow. That's really bold of my partner. Like, she's not usually the one to do something like that in front of all these people. I'm like, okay. And as I'm sitting there enjoying it, all of a sudden I thought, but wait a minute, what if it's not her? And I opened my eyes and looked down, and sure enough, it wasn't her. But she was right there, and she was perfectly okay with it. And so throughout that night, we had some other wonderful interactions with that same person. And I didn't have sex with her or anything like that. But it was the first time in my life that I'm laying there on a couch with my partner on one side and somebody I just met on the other side. Everybody's naked, and there was just nothing but love in that moment. I remember being scared, like, oh my God, my partner, like, what is she going to do? Is she going to be mad at me? Like, should I even allow this? Like, should I say no? Like, what's happening here? And it was just, that was the moment that really opened my mind to the idea that there could be relationships without jealousy. Because there was no jealousy on my partner's part in that moment. And it never caused any friction. We didn't have fights about it later on or anything like that. And that was kind of mind-blowing. I had heard about it. I had plenty of friends that I already knew that were poly, but I never really experienced it for myself. And so that was kind of my first moment, like, wow, you could actually have loving, open relationships and include sexuality without, jealousy, drama, craziness, or any of that. Now, I'm not saying that everybody should go out immediately and do that, but I'm just saying it's possible if that's something that you are looking for.
Yes, happy birthday to you. What would you say these open, polyamorous, or conscious relationship structures force people to learn faster than they might learn if they were monogamous?
Ooh, that is a fantastic question, because to me, that is one of the biggest advantages, even if you only experienced it for a short time and decided it wasn't for you and you're just going to be monogamous for the rest of your life. Because in a monogamous relationship, you can get away with poor relationship skills for a significantly long period of time, right? So if your communication skills aren't particularly good, you see people have been together for decades and I just have terrible communication skills. You can have relatively immature emotional intelligence and
Mm.
still kind of get away with it. I'm not saying that you can have great monogamous relationships, but you can get away with it.
Right.
Whereas in a poly or open relationship, if you don't have excellent communication skills, if you haven't really learned how to master your emotional intelligence, you are going to crash and burn
Mm.
so quickly and so spectacularly
Mhm.
because there's so many more dynamics that have to be managed. When you're in a monogamous relationship, you're managing your dynamic with just your partner, right? But when you just bring one extra person in, now you've got the dynamic between you and your partner, between you and this new person,
Mhm.
between this new person and your partner, right? Between the three of you all together, right? And then you've got, of course, jealousies and things like that may or may not necessarily come up in monogamous relationships. So there's infinitely more to deal with here, which is something I tell guys all the time because, men are always like, yeah, man, I want to have multiple women and, I want to have threesomes all the time. And, I go, be careful what you ask for
Yep.
because trust me, it's a whole lot more difficult than you realize.
Mhm. Mhm. Do you work a lot with people in poly relationships? And if so, what are the common mistakes that you see happening in these relationship structures?
I do work with them, although interestingly enough, I've had a lot fewer of them showing up in my work in the last couple of years. And I
Mhm.
don't not necessarily know why that is, because I've been very open about my own experience in that realm and that I do have years of personal experience with that.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, for some reason, I've had a lot less of them showing up these days, but they do still come around from time to time, and I'm happy to work with them. Uh, some of the biggest issues I see with people who are in poly is they haven't really taken the time to sit down and create the relationship rules or the what we would really call the agreements.
Uh-huh.
There's a lot that goes unsaid. There's a lot that's assumed,
Mm.
and that creates a lot of friction because, well, we're in an open relationship and we agreed that it was okay to have sex with other people. And I was at this party and I met somebody and I had sex with her. And then the other person's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Yes, but we didn't agree to do that without you talking to me first, right? Like
Mhm.
that kind of stuff comes up frequently. And so a lot of it is helping them really create the foundation of the relationship, whether it's a triad or more or whatever it is, helping them go through and really get clear on what it is they all need. I recommend in those types of situations that they actually write these agreements down so
Mm.
that everybody is on the same page. It's kind of like a relationship contract. And other than that, it's a lot of, like I mentioned before, there's infinitely more dynamics that are happening. So a lot of times it's helping them navigate those dynamics because the reality is we're all human, right? We have emotions and we get triggered over things and we get hurt and we feel jealousy. You know, for the most part, anybody that tells you they don't experience jealousy is lying.
Yep.
Now there are some. I've actually met one or two that genuinely just they don't have that emotion for whatever reason, but they are the exception.
Mm.
Most people do experience jealousy, and that's normal. And so a
Mhm.
lot of working with couples who are in open relationships or poly relationships or swinging or whatever it is helping them sort of manage that. And I say manage because it's like our goal here isn't to make you not feel it. Our
Mm.
goal is when you do feel it, it doesn't overwhelm you. It doesn't cause you to lash out or do or say things that you shouldn't, but that you can handle it in an emotionally mature way. You can bring it to, the group, the family, right? And you can work through it. So that's another big part of what we'll often work on with
Mm.
people who are in open relationships.
Mhm. And it's my understanding that you had a wonderful relationship yourself that you built with your partner and wife, Celine, which was both personal and professional. What did working together with your wife teach you about polarity and collaborative partnership?
Ooh, man, you got great questions today. I'm really appreciating them.
Thank you.
I've heard from a lot of people, oh, be careful. Be careful if you're going to be working with your spouse. It
Uh-huh.
creates a lot of problems. Watch out for that one. That was not my experience at all. We worked together so beautifully and so uh, just smoothly, and just total synergy there between the two of us. I absolutely loved it. We obviously lived together, we were married together, we worked together, we were in the house together 24/7, and it was amazing and wonderful, and I loved every minute of it.
Hmm.
Uh, and the fact that we both had such a passion for the work was even better, because we were both just so passionate about creating the content that we created and the programs that we created, and it was wonderful. And when it comes to the polarity of it, um I feel really blessed, because we always just had very easy, natural polarity.
Mm.
And there, in any sort of relationship, there are things that one person is better at than another, or something that one person enjoys doing more than the other one does. And for us, we just sort of naturally fell into those roles. I mean, Celine was a very feminine woman, and she liked to be in the feminine space. She wanted to be creative, and she wanted to meditate on the next program, or you know be more there. And being in the masculine, like, I liked doing a lot of the more technical aspects of it, and so it just naturally worked for us. We didn't really have to try hard.
Mm.
But I understand that that's not the case for everybody. And I would just say, if you are going to work with your spouse, uh, sit down and have those conversations. Okay, what are the things that you like to do in the business? What are the things that you don't like to do? Where are your areas of genius, right? And
Mm.
and I'll tell you all of those things for me. And then let's try to divide up the things that need to happen in the business in a way that works best for both of us. Yeah, the only time we ever had a conflict when it comes to work was, I remember I was really stressed because I was doing a ton of work, and we were going to sit down to create our online programs. And she's like, we got to get it on the calendar. We're going to meet at this time. And I was feeling really stressed with all the stuff I have to do. And so, like, I come into the meeting and I'm like, all right, here we go. Here's what we're going to do. And this blah, 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 blah. I don't remember what she said to me, but I apparently just came in too strong, here's how it's going to be, And I don't remember what she said to me. I just paused, and I just looked at her, and just looking into those big green eyes of hers, and I was just like, "You're right. I am totally sorry. I was totally in that mode, and you're right. I shouldn't approach it this way." That was like the only time we ever had, and that was in the very beginning when we started working together. So,
Wow.
uh, I think it's amazing. I think too many times people want to make everything perfectly even. I do this and then you
Mm.
do that, and I do this and then you do that. And the reality is that that's just not the way polarized masculine and feminine relationships work, whether it's just your relationship in general, or whether it's working together. It doesn't have to be 50-50 all the time, and in fact, that actually generally kills the polarity in your relationship. So
Mm.
go with what works naturally best for both of you. And
Mm-hmm.
that might mean somebody does more of something than another thing. All that's really important is that you both feel that both of you are contributing to it, uh, in a way, like, so somebody doesn't feel like they're doing everything, right?
Mm.
As long as you feel like your partner's contributing to the overall, well-being of the project, then it shouldn't really matter how much of one thing or another thing that somebody did or didn't do.
Mm-hmm. That's great advice. Thank you. And yeah, no point scoring.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm also aware that Celine has since passed. I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sure there are many people listening who have been through grief and are curious to hear how a sexpert like yourself deals with loss and its impact on desire. After her passing, how did your relationship to desire change, and what was that process like for you, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, she went through a health challenge that towards the end, she wasn't capable physically of, being intimate or sexual in any way. And at that point in time, I mean, neither of us cared. Our only goal was how do we get her better,
Mm,
right? Like, sex was like, yeah, whatever. We'll get back to that, when we're on the other side of this. So I had pretty much just completely shut down my
mm,
sexuality, months before she passed because I was just so focused on, one, trying to help her, and two, trying to keep all the rest of life going, maintaining the house, doing all the cooking, doing all the chores, being the sole, person working, doing everything. That sex was just like, there's no time for that.
mm,
um, or even possibility for that. So, and then, after she passed, I mean, it really was kind of the furthest thing from my mind. It wasn't anything I was thinking about at all. And it wasn't something that I wasn't thinking, well, maybe the best way to get over this is to just go out and, date a bunch of women and have a bunch of sex. Like that never
mm,
crossed my mind at all. Um, there was just a long period of time where all I was really trying to do was survive, to
mm,
be honest. So yeah, sex was just not a thing. Uh, but I'm very fortunate that I do have some amazing, friends and people in my life, because one of them was somebody that was a former lover, um, that came from both the Tantra and Poly communities. And after a certain period of time, and she was reaching out all along, just you know she wanted to support me in holding a memorial for Celine, and she was there supporting me all along in other ways. But at a certain point in time, and she was in a polyamorous relationship with her husband, she inquired about, would you be open, to being sexual with me. And that was really the first time where I was like, am I really ready for this? Like,
mm,
is this something I even really want to do? And we talked about it, her and I. And because she, was married and she was poly, like, she basically said, look, I'm not looking for you to be a long term partner of mine. She's like, but I want to help you get through this and sort of get back on your feet, so to speak.
mm,
And so, we were lovers for a few months there, and honestly, I really absolutely credit her on helping me bring my sexuality back online, because it was completely shut down for
mm,
a period of time. And the beautiful thing about that is I didn't do that with, somebody I was looking to date. I didn't have to go through that with them. I didn't have to have them go through the challenges of me dealing with all of that stuff. I
mm,
got to do it really, in a container where that was already understood,
mhm.
and there weren't any expectations about how any of it was going to look.
Wow.
And I thought that was a really beautiful thing. And then,
Yeah.
at a certain point in time, she was like, I feel like it's time for us to transition out of that space and just go back to friends again. And but once I had had that experience, then I was like, okay, oh yeah, here's me again. Here's me as a physical being again.
Mm,
I can actually go out and do this with somebody else.
mm. What a profound experience. Yeah, I'm truly touched by that. How beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. I
Ah,
imagine that most people probably won't have access to that sort of a situation,
no.
but
Yeah. hmm So, if there is someone listening who's feeling overwhelmed and unsure whether to focus on technique, healing, or love, and they're just really not sure what the next step is, where would you invite them to begin?
I always say you got to start with yourself. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people come to me and they're like, well, I want to work with you because my partner this, my partner that, my partner this, that, and the other thing. And I say, okay, you know, some of what you say about your partner is likely very true. Some of it maybe not. But the reality is that it always starts with you.
Mm.
Right. So when somebody comes to me and they're like, my sex life isn't good because my partner this, I go, okay, we'll get to that. But let's start working on you. So if you're in a relationship and the relationship itself maybe isn't working that well, or the sex, either one, the first thing to do is to really just pause and reflect on where you're at. What is your part in it? How could you do better? Where are your past patterns and traumas and things? Where are they holding you back, or where are they getting in the way? Right. And really start working on yourself. The term that I use all the time is become the best version of yourself. And
Mm.
what a lot of times people find, because I've seen this in my own life, it's been true for me too. A lot of times I find that when you yourself shift and change, even if you didn't say a single word to the other person and they didn't do anything different than they did before, the relationship itself shifts and change, right? And so you can really make profound changes just by working on yourself. And so that's where I always tell people to start. Start working on yourself first.
Mm-hmm.
And then, if your partner is willing, which hopefully they are, you can start bringing them into the work as well. And I think if you really are looking at yourself, you'll start to see some patterns in ways that you show up and the ways that you react in certain situations that you could potentially shift. And you know what? If you're if you're looking at yourself and you go, no, I think all is good. It's probably all just my partner. I would say get help from somebody, because you probably aren't able to see your own stuff, because that's
Mm.
challenging for all of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is where working with somebody like myself can be really helpful, because I'm not in it. I'm looking at it from the outside, and it's way easier for me to see the patterns and things that are happening there.
Mm-hmm. So where can people find out more about you and your offerings?
The best place is to go to my website, which is kevinanthonycoaching.com. From there, you can find all the things that I am up to. So you can find my coaching programs. You can find my podcast, the Love Lab podcast. You can find my YouTube channel there, which is Kevin Anthony Coaching. You can find products that I recommend or that I sell. You can find my online courses, blog articles. It is all at kevinanthonycoaching.com.
Wonderful. And finally, if you had to describe your erotic self in one word and one word only, what would that word be and why?
Ooh, one word.
Mm-hmm.
Man, you're talking to somebody that talks for a living. I can't do anything in one word. Let's see. One word. Um, what would that word be? I would say curious.
Mm-hmm.
Curious, which is, always open to learning something new.
Mm. I love it. Well, Kevin, thank you for sharing your erotic realm and showing that mastery isn't about dominance or control, but about presence, responsibility, and courage. It's been a real pleasure to chat to you.
Thank you so much for having me on, and I really appreciated your questions.
Thank you again. I'm Em, and this has been the Erotic Realm Podcast. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Erotic Realm Podcast. This is an independent podcast. If you want to see more episodes made, you can support it at psychologyofdesire.com by becoming a paid subscriber and entering the realm with many other supporters. The mission of the Erotic Realm is to humanize kink and desire in all of its forms. And we can't do that without you. Until the next time, stay perverted.